The shadows seemed to close in on him. Hong Kong is a city known for its modern beauty, a unique blend of Eastern and Western cultures. Its gleaming skyscrapers and vibrant streets are a stark contrast to the old, mystical secrets hidden deep within the city's heart. While most tourists are drawn to the neon-lit skyline, few realize that the city is also home to a dark and twisted history that still haunts its people. Among the many eerie stories passed down through generations, one of the most chilling comes from Kowloon, a bustling district filled with ancient tales of spirits and curses. In the 1980s, a wealthy and prominent family, the Trangs, moved into a grand villa in Kowloon, located in an area locals called Witch's Alley. The name alone sends shivers down the spine, as it is said to be a place where the spiritual realm and the physical world collide. Witch's Alley was indicated with strange occurrences, ghostly silence, and whispers of forgotten tragedies. The villa itself was a magnificent building, one that exuded both luxury and mystery. However, it wasn't the first family to reside there. The previous owners had left suddenly, abandoning the house in a hurry. The walls of the home were rumored to be soaked with unsettling energy, as though the house itself carried the weight of a dark past. Rumors circulated that the family had been driven away by forces beyond their control, leaving behind strange markings and unsettling symbols etched into the furniture, floors, and walls. When the Trang family moved in, they were unaware of the house's terrifying reputation. At first, everything seemed perfect. The family was excited to start a new chapter in their luxurious home, but soon inexplicable things began to happen. It started with small noises at night, whispers, the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. No one was there. Doors opened by themselves. The disturbing part was the mirrors. Every time they cleaned the mirrors in the house, a layer of mist would inexplicably appear, no matter how much they wiped them down. It was as if the glass was clouded. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, Trang decided to take matters into her own hands. She decided to learn more about the house's history and uncover the truth behind these bizarre events. She spoke to a neighbor who had lived in the area for years and was told a terrifying tale of the house's former occupants. The neighbor shared that the family before the Trangs had been cursed. They had mysteriously disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. The rumor was that the family had angered a restless spirit, one whose revenge had forced them out of the house. The story went that the previous family had attempted to perform a ritual to honor the spirits and gain their favor before leaving. Something went horribly wrong. The ritual was flawed, and instead of appeasing the spirits, it only angered them, leading to a curse that plagued the house. This revelation sent chills down Mrs. Trang's spine, but she pressed on, determined to uncover more. She learned that the house had been built on land believed to have once been the site of an ancient temple. It was said that the land had been cursed long ago, and anyone who built on it was exhausted from her search for answers, Mrs. Trang decided to sleep in the living room rather than her bedroom. She hoped the change of scenery might bring her some peace, but that night she experienced something she would never forget. As she drifted off into a deep sleep, she found herself trapped in a nightmare so vivid, so real, that she could hardly distinguish it from reality. In the dream, she saw a woman dressed in a flowing white gown. Her face was horribly disfigured, covered in deep cuts and scars, her eyes hollow with an eerie, unsettling emptiness. The woman stood right before Mrs. Trang, staring at her with a cold, malevolent smile, her lips curled up in a grotesque grin. And she began to laugh, softly at first, then louder, until it became an echoing cackle that reverberated through Mrs. Trang's mind. The more she tried to scream, the tighter the woman's grip on her grew, freezing her in place. When Mrs. Trang woke up, drenched in sweat and heart pounding in her chest, the air around her felt laughter in her ears. And it felt as though the spirit had been right beside her all along, but the terror didn't end there. As she lay still, she was alone, yet it felt as if someone or something The next morning, Mrs. Trang couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She was convinced that the house was alive, that the spirits of those who had lived and died there still lingered. The unsettling occurrences intensified, leaving the family in a constant state of fear. Unable to bear it any longer, the Trang family decided to leave the villa in the dead of night. They packed their things and fled, leaving the house behind in silence. As they drove away, they could still hear the echoes of the house's cursed past, a memory that would haunt them forever. The villa remained empty for years, abandoned and decaying, as whispers of its dark history spread throughout the neighborhood. People would cross the street to avoid walking past the property, and no one dared enter its gates. The legends surrounding the house only grew stronger with time. To this day, locals say that the house is still haunted. The air around it remains thick with the energy of those who once lived there, and at night, the faint sounds of footsteps, eerie whispers, and ghostly laughter can still be heard drifting through the darkness. Some claim to have seen figures moving around windows, others speak of cold drafts and a lingering feeling of dread that follows anyone who dares to approach. The house on Witch's Alley stands as a reminder of the forces that lie beyond our understanding. And for those brave enough to venture too close, it offers a chilling glimpse into the past that refuses to be forgotten. After the Trang family fled in the dead of night, the villa was left abandoned for years. The once grand house stood as a silent, decaying monument to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. The windows were covered in layers of grime, and the garden outside had become overgrown with weeds. The iron gate rusted shut. But even in its neglected state, there was a presence, a feeling that lingered in the air, as if the house itself was waiting for something or someone. The house's reputation grew with time. Whispers about the cursed villa spread throughout Kowloon, drawing the curious and the brave to the area. Some came out of morbid fascination. Others seemed to answer to the mysterious but those who ventured too close never returned the same. They spoke of the strange sensations that overtook them. One evening, a group of young thrill seekers from a neighboring area decided to test their courage. They were well aware of the rumors, but were eager to prove that the supernatural tales were nothing more than stories. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they made their way to Witch's Alley, determined to spend the night in the villa and record their experience. As they approached the house, the air around them grew colder, and the sounds of the city faded into an eerie silence. The gate, which had once been locked, now creaked open with a slow, haunting groan, as if inviting them inside. Their flashlights flickered, casting long, unnerving shadows on the crumbling walls. One of the group, a young man named Alan, was the first to step through the threshold. His voice breaking the silence with a nervous laugh. "It's just an old house, guys," Alan said, trying to sound confident. "Let's get this over with." But as they entered the foyer, something felt wrong. The house seemed to have a life of its own, as though the walls were breathing, shifting with every step they took. The air was thick with an oppressive weight, and the temperature seemed to drop by several degrees with each passing moment. They made their way to the floorboards creaking underfoot, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty rooms. The house was more dilapidated than they had imagined, with peeling wallpaper, cracked mirrors, and furniture that had been abandoned in haste. In one room they found a large, ornate mirror covered in a thin layer of dust. It was the same type of mirror Mrs. Trang had described, the one that had mysteriously fogged up every time someone tried to claim it. "Let's take a selfie in front of this mirror," Alan suggested, holding up his phone. "Let's prove once and for all that there's nothing to fear here." But as the group gathered around the mirror, something strange happened. Their reflections were distorted, warped, as if the glass itself was alive, twisting their features into grotesque shapes. The room grew colder, and a low hum filled the air, as if the house was vibrating with a life force they couldn't understand. One of the girls, Maria, began to feel dizzy, her breath coming in short gasps. "Guys, I don't feel right," Maria said, her voice trembling. Before they could react, on the other side. The group froze, their eyes wide with fear, and just as suddenly a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing their flashes. In the darkness, Just out of reach, they spun around, but no one was there. It was messy with us. Alan called out, his voice laced with panic, but no answer came. In the silence, they heard it, a whisper. Faint at first, but growing louder, as if someone was right next to them, speaking words they couldn't quite understand. The air around them grew thick with a sense of dread, and the temperature seemed to plummet further. Suddenly, Maria screamed. She pointed to the mirror, her face pale with terror. There in the reflection was the figure of a woman, dressed in white, her face hidden in shadow, but her eyes, those eyes were glaring directly at them, filled with malice. They bolted out the room, stumbling over each other in their pain. But the house seemed to be alive, shifting and changing as they ran. The doors they had entered through no longer seemed to lead to the outside, and the hallways twisted in impossible ways. It was as though the house itself was trapping them within its walls. Feeding on their fear, when they finally managed to escape, they were breathless, their hearts pounding in their chests. The night air felt like a lifeline as they rushed out the gate, but as they looked back, they could still hear it, the whispering of the footsteps and the faint, echoing laughter that seemed following them. The group never spoke of that night again, but their experience was enough to convince them that the house on which is alley was no ordinary house. Something dark and malevolent lingered there, something that had survived the passage of time and the attempts of previous families to escape. The Trang family's story was only the beginning of the house's dark history. As years passed, more people attempted to uncover its secrets, but all were met with the same chilling results. And the house, still standing, remained an ever-present reminder of the forces beyond human understanding, forces that, once awakened, are nearly impossible to escape. As the legend of the cursed house continued to grow, it became clear that the spirits of the past were not willing to let go. And no matter how many years passed, they would continue to haunt the villa, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its threshold. Years passed, but the house on which is alley remained a place of deep fear. Despite the growing legends surrounding the villa, some out of curiosity, others seeking to confront the ghosts of the past. Yet every person who ventured near it came away with a story of strange occurrences. Like the same. Became fascinated by the house's unsettling reputation. A man of logic and reason, Dr. Lau had spent his life studying the folklore of Hong Kong. His work focused on debunking myths, putting to rest tales of house's reign of terror, Dr. Lau decided to visit the villa himself. Armed with his research and a determination to uncover the truth, he arrived one evening just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house stood before him, towering and imposing, its windows dark. Its doors closed, it looked like any other abandoned building, but Dr. Lau knew better. The air felt thick with an unexplainable presence, and as he stepped closer to the front door, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Inside, the house seemed different than it had in the daylight. The rooms were suffused with an oppressive atmosphere, and the silence felt suffocating. As Dr. Lau moved through the house, his flashlight flickered on and off, casting eerie shadows against the walls. Every step he took seemed to echo through the vast, empty space, but it wasn't just the sound of his footsteps that unsettled him. It was the feeling of being watched, as though something or someone was observing his every move. Dr. Lau stopped in front of the ornate mirror, the same one that the Trang family had encountered. He read about it in his research. The mirror was said to be cursed, the gateway to the spirit world that held the souls of the restless dead. It was rumored that if you stared into it for too long, you would begin to see things that didn't belong in this world, things that could drive a person mad. Ignoring the warnings, Dr. Lau stood before the mirror, his face reflected in its cracked surface. The air around him grew colder, and he felt a strange pressure building in his chest. As he stared into the glass, the edges of his reflection began to warp, his image twisted, elongated before his eyes. His own face began to contort into something unrecognizable. In the mirror, he saw not his own features, but the face of a woman, her eyes hollow, her mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Suddenly, the air grew thick and the temperature plummeted. The lights flickered violently, casting a dim glow over the room. Dr. Lau stepped back, heart pounding in his chest. His breath was shallow, his hands trembling. The whispering began soft at first, then growing louder until it was all clear. The walls themselves were alive with voices, chanting in a language he could not understand. The mirror began to fog up, just as it had for the Trang family. But this time the fog did not clear. It swirled slowly, whispers turned to a low growl, and Dr. Lau felt something pulling at his very soul, urging him to step closer, to give in to the spirits that haunted this place. His rational mind screamed at him to leave, but his body felt frozen, as if the house itself had trapped him in a nightmare he couldn't escape. It wasn't until he heard a loud crash behind him that he snapped out of his trance. The sound was enough to break the spell, and he turned to find a piece of furniture that had fallen to the ground. Terrified, Dr. Lau ran from the room, desperately trying to escape the house's grip. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the exit. The hallways seemed endless, stretching and twisting in ways that defied logic. The house was shifting around him, its very structure playing tricks on his mind. He stumbled, breathless as... When he finally emerged into the fresh air, Dr. Lau felt as though he had narrowly escaped the clutches of death itself. His face was pale, his body shaking, and he could not get the image of the twisted woman in the mirror out of his mind. As he walked away from the villa, he knew one thing for certain: the curse of witches Ali was real, and it was far from over. For the rest of his life, Dr. Lau never spoke of what he had seen. But the haunting presence of the villa stayed with him, and he became obsessed with finding a way to break the curse. However, like so many before him, he would find that some mysteries are too powerful to unravel, and some spirits too vengeful to appease. The house stood, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to enter its walls. The story of the villa on which his alley seemed to take on a life of its own. The whispers of its haunted past only grew louder as time passed, drawing more people to the place in search of answers, closure, or simply the thrill of the unknown. But the more they sought to uncover its mysteries, the deeper they fell into its grasp. In 2003, a team of paranormal investigators from a renowned ghost hunting show in Hong Kong decided to visit the house. The producers, intrigued by the story of the Trang family and Dr. Lau's near-death experience, believed that this case could be the most compelling episode yet. The team arrived with their cameras and a sense of optimism. They had faced ghosts, spirits, and entities before. This would be no different, but they were wrong. The team, led by their fearless host, packed the fire and set up their equipment. haunted places in the city, but the tension was palpable the moment they entered the villa. The house, though abandoned for years, still carried the faint scent of decay and something far more sinister. It was as if the house had been waiting for them, ready to show them the depths of its darkness. As they set up their cameras and began their investigation, the crew felt an unnerving stillness settle over them. For hours they moved through the house, documenting everything they encountered. First, there were the usual noises. Faint footsteps echoing through the halls, doors creaking open by themselves, and furniture shifting as if unseen hands were at work. But then the events took a more terrifying turn. Around midnight, as the team gathered in the kitchen, the temperature in the room suddenly dropped to freezing levels. A breath visible in the air, the crew exchanged nervous glances. One of the investigators, Emily, was the first to notice the presence. Her eyes widened, and she pointed toward the far corner of the room. I think someone is there, she whispered. The team turned, but the corner was empty, save for the shadows that seemed to hang on. The air felt thick, oppressive. Patrick, determined to get footage for their viewers, motioned for the team to continue, though it was clear that everyone was on edge. As they moved into the living room, the real terror began. The room, once filled with a subtle, quiet malevolence, now felt alive, pulsing with a power that none of them could comprehend. The lights began to flicker. The temperature dropped even further, and then through the shadows they heard it. A soft, distant laugh. It wasn't human. It was guttural and dry, as though it came from deep within the earth. The crew froze in place, their hearts racing. Emily, visibly shaken, pointed to the mirror in the center of the room. There, reflected in the glass, stood the woman, the same ghostly figure that doctor Lau had seen years before. She was dressed in a tattered white gown, her face obscured by shadow, but her eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. They glowed with an unnatural light when they were fixed on the crew. The laughter grew louder, and with it, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the light. Suddenly, Patrick took the arm and directed his face and gripped his heart. He was no longer thinking about his viewers or the episode. All he wanted was to escape, turn on the lights, turn them on now. The lights were in the house itself. The lights finally flickered back to life. The crew was gone. They weren't standing in the middle of the living room where they had been moments before. Instead, they were outside the villa on the street, bewildered and frightened. But something was wrong. They hadn't left the villa voluntarily. No one remembered how they had gotten outside, and the cameras they had been using showed nothing but static after the lights went out. It was as though the entire encounter had been erased from time. They couldn't explain what had happened, but we all felt the same chilling sensation. They had been marked by the house, chosen to witness its power, but never allowed to leave with their sanity intact. Patrick, once the fearless leader, became a shadow of his former self. He spoke little after the incident, his eyes constantly scanning the room as if expecting the ghostly woman to reappear at any moment. The rest of the crew were still shaken and tried to move on, but the memories of the haunting would never leave them. As for the villa, it remained as it always had, silent, dark, and waiting. But in 2006, a man named Derek Won, a real estate developer, came across the villa while scouting properties. Derek was known for his ambitious projects and had a reputation for transforming even the most dilapidated buildings into thriving, luxurious spaces. When he saw the old villa on Witch's Alley, he saw potential. The house, despite its eerie history, was an architectural gem. Derek decided that it was time to bring new life to the place. He purchased the property, determined to turn it into a luxury hotel that would attract high-end tourists. But when construction began, things quickly went awry. The workers reported strange occurrences even before the renovations officially started. Tools would go missing, only to reappear in odd locations. Large sections of the foundation had to be replaced multiple times, as if something beneath the house was actively resisting their efforts. One worker, a seasoned contractor named Samuel, quit after claiming to have seen the ghostly woman in the mirror while working in the main living room. He spoke of her icy stare and a terrible smile, and how he felt it was following him. Deterred by the warning, he come at a steep cost. One evening, as he walked through the house to inspect the progress, Derek noticed a faint glow coming from the second floor. mirror was there, just as he had been told, and in its reflection stood the woman, waiting. This time, however, Derek saw more than just her face. There were others with her, spectral figures that surrounded her, their faces twisted in agony. As the room grew colder, Derek turned to run, but before he could move, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. The world around him blurred as darkness consumed him. The next morning, Derek was found lying unconscious in the middle of the room. Face pale, his body shaking. The doctors who examined him could find no physical reason for his collapse, but Derek knew what had happened. The house had taken its toll on him, just as it had with so many before. He never returned to the villa after that night. The construction was halted, and the villa was left abandoned once more. The legend of Witch's Alley continued to grow, and the house remained as one of the most feared and mysterious locations in all of Hong Kong. It was clear that some places were meant to remain undisturbed, and some spirits, no matter how much time passed, would never rest. The villa on Witch's Alley stood as a chilling reminder that some ghosts would not return to Hong Kong and seek revenge and location. By 2010, the villa on Witch's Alley had earned a place in Hong Kong's most notorious paranormal legends. Its dark history had become part of the local folklore, whispered among residents. Spoken of only in hushed tones as people passed by, yet despite all the warnings, some still believed they could confront the spirits and break the curse. Few were as determined as a journalist named Li Wei. Li Wei had always been skeptical of the supernatural. A young reporter with a sharp mind and a fearless attitude, he thrived on uncovering the truth, no matter how dark or dangerous. When he first heard about the villa, he dismissed it as just another urban myth. But after hearing so many accounts from terrified locals, including the stories of Dr. Lau, the Trang family, and the paranormal investigators, he became obsessed. He was determined to prove once and for all whether the villa was truly haunted or just a story made up by people with Li Wei contacted some and met with Dr. Lau, who had grown older and more withdrawn since his investigation. Doctor. Lau's face fell on the floor, and Li Wei asked him, "I don't understand," Dr. Lau said, his voice trembling. "It's not just a haunted house, it's a force, a presence that feeds off fear. It's not something you can reason with. It will consume you just as it consumed everyone before." But Li Wei was undeterred. He rented a small camera crew, equipped himself with ghost hunting equipment, and set off to the villa one cold autumn night. When he arrived, the air around the house felt heavy, almost thick with anticipation. The villa loomed in the distance, its windows dark and empty, like the hollow eyes of a forgotten skull. Despite the stories he had heard, Li Wei felt nothing but determination. He would uncover the truth. Inside, the house seemed to be in a state of stasis. The furniture had been abandoned, the floors were dusty, and the walls still carried faint remnants of the once grandiose decor. But there was something else, an underlying presence that Li Wei couldn't shake. The oppressive air that had terrified so many before him weighed down on his shoulders. He moved through the rooms, setting up cameras and sound equipment. His footsteps echoed in the silence, and the creaks of the old house seemed to follow him. For hours, he found nothing but the normal sounds of the But as midnight approached, the air began to change. It started with the temperature drop, as if a freezing gust of wind had swept through the house, but the windows were all closed. Li Wei's breath became visible in the air, his pulse quickening as the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. That's when he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the hallways. At first, he dismissed it. He was in an old house, after all. The sound could easily be caused by settling foundations or drafts, but as the footsteps grew louder, they no longer sounded like an ordinary creep. They sounded like something was walking toward him. Li Wei's camera recorded everything. The footage captured the distorted shadows moving unnaturally across the walls, but what disturbed him most was the whispering, at first faint then growing clearer with every passing second. Words he couldn't make out, only a low, almost guttural hum that seemed to seep into his mind. His heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve remained firm. And then, just as he turned to check the wall, the woman, the form was barely visible at first, as though the shadows had come alive and coalesced into a shape. But when Li Wei saw her fully, his heart stopped. She stood there in front of him, white now sounding like a chorus of voices from the past. Li Wei stepped back, his body paralyzed with fear. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, as the woman drifted closer, her laughter filling the air. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, a wave of malevolence that seemed to emanate from her very being. "Leave," she whispered, her voice both distant and incredibly close. "Leave and become one with us." Li Wei finally snapped out of his paralysis and ran. But the house twisted around him, the hallways shifting and stretching, trapping him inside. The whispers became louder, more urgent, as though the house itself was rejecting him, pulling him deeper into its darkening maze. Desperate, he stumbled, his hands shaking as he tried to find the exit, but it was no use. The house was alive, alive with the memories of those who had died there, alive with their anger, their grief, and their desire for vengeance. It wasn't until hours later that Li Wei was found, lying unconscious outside the villa, a look of sheer terror frozen on his face. His camera crew, who had been waiting outside, rushed inside, looking for all they found were distorted images of the woman and the shifting shadows. There was no evidence of what had happened to Li Wei during those hours inside the house. When Li Wei woke up in the hospital, he was a broken man. His mind was shattered. His once strong skepticism replaced by a deep, undeniable fear. He could no longer look at the world the same way. The house on which his alley had broken him, just as it had broken so many others. The villa was left alone once more, the land claiming its victims one by one. For years, no one dared to approach it again. The stories of the ghostly woman and the house's dark power became part of the fabric of Kowloon's history. A cautionary tale for anyone who dared to test the forces beyond human understanding. And so, the villa remained, standing tall in the shadows of the city, waiting for the next curious soul to